Shinji Mikami, director of the first Resident Evil, was very much intending from the beginning to make a follow-up to the game. So when production was completed on it, 1 month later his team of developers started to work immediately on the second one. However, the initial basis for it was dismissed from Capcom, claiming that the story was not going to allow them to create more installments to the series, seeing as how Mikami wanted to conclude and end the series with part 2. The production brought professional writer Noboru Sugimura to expand and help fix the story issues that Capcom wasn't happy with. Resident Evil 1.5 was the name given to the beta of Resident Evil 2. One of the biggest changes made to this early build of the game had to do with the character of Elsa Walker, who was later updated to become Claire Redfield as we know now from the games. She originally had no relation to Chris Redfield and was meant to be a motorcycle racer who was still studying in college. They later changed this to have Claire be Chris's sister to ensure a better connection to the first game. Leon's character was for the most part left as he was since the beginning, and him and Claire weren't going to interact with each other throughout the story in this beta version of the game.
Leon!
It's good to see you're still among the living.
The team of actors who gave their voices to the characters of this game were all Canadian, but there is one actor who I want to make a special notice of. Alyson Court is the actress to last the longest voicing her character. She has reprised her role in every single instant Claire has made an appearance in the series, including the animated movie, except for one game, Resident Evil Revelations 2. But what makes her especially noteworthy for me is the fact that she was the main girl acting in the children's show, The Big Comfy Couch, a show that I loved to watch as a kid and that's super nostalgic to me. So I guess she was a major part of both my childhood and my teenage years. Even though development for Resident Evil 2 took so much time, personally I think it's for the best. Resident Evil 1.5 serves as an interesting what-if scenario, but the way they managed to pull off such a vast and engaging survival horror game is something that I greatly appreciate today. This installment in the series was the first I had ever played, originally thinking it was supposed to be a follow-up to the 2002 movie. I thought I was going to get to play as Alice, so you can imagine my disappointment when it popped it in the PlayStation. However, as I continued to play it, there was something about it that made me not put it down at all. The fixed camera angles, the tank controls, the character interactions, and the creature encounters was something I had never experienced before with video games. And as I continued making progress, I was loving it more and more. To this day, Resident Evil 2 is still my favorite game of all time. So let's analyze this video game classic as I take you into Chapter 2 of my Resident Evil retrospective. Expanding on the first installment, Resident Evil 2 has so much more to offer in terms of characters and plot than what we've previously experienced. Characters that are at this point so unmistakable and prolific to the overlong and never-ending series that is Resident Evil at this point are introduced to us here, such as Leon S. Kennedy, Claire Redfield, and Ada Wong. Leon and Claire arrive into the small town of Raccoon City at the same time, both with the same destination, the Raccoon City Police Department. Leon arrives as a new recruit outsourced from somewhere else, and Claire is trying to get in contact with her brother who is, as mentioned before, Chris Redfield. However, it's here in Raccoon City, the origin of Umbrella Inc., and area where the events of the first game took place, where they slowly and surely unraveled the tragic and catastrophic disaster that Umbrella and the T-Virus has caused. Characters are definitely much more fleshed out, and the dialogue was allowed to be much more well written, comparatively, of course, to the game that came before. Because this still being a PS1 title, the acting isn't far from coming off as cheesy and very video gamey.
Don't move! No! No!
Help me! Leon!
So it's true. You have been working with Umbrella. Then you must know about the G-Virus. What is it? Tell me!
Come on, time to leave.
Now? What's wrong? Is something following us?
We have to go. We don't have any time to waste.
Go? Where?
Hey, it's up to us to take out Umbrella. No!
Despite this, however, every character is given a defined personality and cause. Even if it is just one-dimensional, people react and develop as the story unfolds, and by the end of it, you feel like you've taken them through a journey that has had impact. I just want to warn you before I continue that there will be a lot of comparing this game to the original. I know it may feel or get redundant, but keep in mind that I'm using it to make clear how much of an overall improvement this game is to the original. One of the main problems the first game had with its story was how both the dialogue and the acting made everyone seem so robotic and lifeless, especially considering that they were supposed to be going through the most traumatic situations a person can encounter. But then one scene after that, they'd start cracking lame-ass jokes and one-liners.
You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right.
Oh! I can't believe it! Are you okay?
Yeah, so much for him. We got to the root of the problem.
With this second installment, a much bigger effort is made into actually getting voice actors. Granted, that has to do with the improved production budget, but cheesy dialogue or not, for me, the acting never feels out of place for a video game of this era. At the same time, despite all the efforts that are made to have a decent story, there are some pretty awful flaws with it. For example, characters like the scientist who created the G-Virus, William Birkin, alongside his wife Annette, and Chief Irons are pretty much the same character. They're all mustache-twirling psychopaths who are remorseless and act out some cliché dialogue.
It's sheer perfection. My precious G-Virus. No one will ever take you away from me.
So you've made it this far. Not bad, girl. But I'm not letting anyone leave my town. Everyone's gonna die.
If you don't want to believe it, I don't really care. You're about to die anyway.
I understand how they wanted the Chief to be like this game's version of Wesker from the first game, where he's like supposed to be the good guy but turned traitor, and I like the added sense of dread a character can bring to a game like this where not all scares come from just the creatures and zombies. But what's the use in having William and Annette be antagonistic as well? I mean, William comes across as nothing more than a complete selfish asshole, and Annette, while she finally is able to have a sensitive and relatable moment, that's only really until she's faced with accepting her death. All throughout every encounter with her, she's just as vindictive and selfish as her husband. Sherry is the couple's daughter and ends up getting lost a couple times. When she does, it's even implied that the only reason Annette wants to find her is because of Sherry's possession of a G-Virus sample. I understand that they wanted to convey a sort of tragic scenario where the parents are neglectful, but they could have tried and made them more relatable. A sad situation where the parents are loving but not willing to put in the time to spend with their child because they're too busy pursuing their careers. Maybe his transformation could have made more sense because he was facing his final moments full of fear and regret. Then in his desperation, as a final effort to try and get his revenge and keep on surviving, he injects himself with what has consumed his life figuratively up to this point, and will consume his life literally thereafter. Not just have it be the G-Virus status and power. All other characters are definitely better written than this. They aren't excellent by any means, but work for the era this was made in and make the whole storytelling experience fairly decent to endure. Chris's diary serves as an element that links this game and the previous one, I think more so than anything else in the game. By reading it, you can learn about some not too detailed reasons why all the previous main characters are nowhere to be found. But the way it's written is pretty sloppy. Basically, it describes how after the mansion went up in flames, all the survivors tried to explain to everyone that Umbrella was the root cause of this and so many horrific deaths. No one believes them, of course, for some reason, even though they're the only people out of the entire town to be trusted. Chris explains that the reason for this is because of how Umbrella controls everything in the city, but I don't know, it always seemed too far-fetched for me. Especially considering how long after the events of the previous game took place in relation to this one. Another aspect that I cannot get behind that the Resident Evil development team has been doing since the beginning is this idea of killing off characters only to later confirm in future installments that they were able to survive somehow. I mean, I get having the main protagonist be successful in surviving, but they pretty much confirm again in Chris's diary that Barry, someone who in most scenarios ended up dying one way or another, all of a sudden is a part of the survival team. Ada's character is also killed off in both varying scenarios of the Leon campaign, and while the death scenes are heart-wrenching in their own way, they don't mean shit when we know that later these people end up coming back, which only lend less credibility to the series even back then, as much as I hate to admit it. It gives it this supernatural element that later on in another one of my favorite games from the franchise is even more emphasized with the presence of Wesker in it, but that's a whole other discussion when I get to Code Veronica, trust me. I understand them wanting to create more games and expand the universe, but something like that gives this whole story a cheesy-ass Dragon Ball Z anime element that I feel really doesn't belong here. Documents and in-game files you read serve fine for world building, even though there are considerably less here than in the first one. However, I will say that files from the original are much more impactful and create a greater sense of dread and eeriness. The letters from this game are definitely much more technical and feel less personal. There's one though that stands out to me, and I really don't like it. When you get approximately to the halfway point, you're able to read a certain letter sent to the chief of police from the G-Virus creator William. All it is basically exposition and very overlong and drawn out, even for a Resident Evil file. It's like they couldn't figure out how to scatter information about William and the chief all throughout the police department, so they opted to have the easiest and less stressful way of presenting us with all the information we need to know about both of them. I'm sorry, I'm speaking so much about the story here, but even though this is still my favorite game in the franchise, I can admit that the reason the first game felt very isolated and dreary is because of the lack of so many characters and outside sources. The files and setting allowed only to build a world small enough to feel unforgiving and apathetic to you and all the members of your team. I feel like if you try and expand from that, going from a humble, small but spooky set of events to a grander Hollywood-type style of storytelling, there will be some problems and plot holes that start to come up as you dissect it. And I get it, this is only a PS1 game, but what's frustrating is that one of the main reasons why I love this game so much is because of its ideas. There's a lot of potential here to make a properly built story that feels unique and stylish, even more than I already think it is. Virtually everything has been updated and improved since the first game. Nothing feels like it was overlooked or not given the time to be polished. With the level of classic 3D video game charm and presentation Resident Evil 2 was able to pull off, if you played the original after this one, it would give you the impression that perhaps someone made the first game in their basement somewhere on a close to nothing budget, that maybe they ripped off the gameplay and presentation style of this game and just made their own bootleg prequel and called it Resident Evil. The textures are much more detailed, as well as the polygon count on any of the elements that are interacted with. The zombies are designed to have a much more urban feel, although I'm kinda disappointed that there's only one female zombie type. Here, characters' designs are what set the standard to how they should look in all other games they appear in. Even though Claire was pretty much only given a ponytail because long and flowing hair was so difficult to program for in the early days of 3D gaming. Beside the fact that they had to end production on Resident Evil 1.5 60% into development, nothing in this final version the public received feels rushed or overlooked in any way. They definitely made sure to polish anything as much as they could. I know games are much more complicated nowadays, but even so, I have to say that there aren't many examples of this happening anymore. The main and principal setting of the game is the Raccoon City Police Department, which is this game's version of the mansion in the Arklay Mountains. It's very similarly structured and even has one area that looks almost identical to the stairs hallway, where a save room is also in. So from this, it's very clear that the developers created it as an homage and spiritual brother to the original game's mansion. Locations and rooms have a great variety in detail and personality. It definitely is filled to the brim with atmosphere. Files and papers can be found scattered on the ground, windows are broken, alleyways have all manners of debris and trash hidden in the background, a liquor monster is seen crawling over a window in front of you right before your confrontation with it that serves as an amazing foreshadowing, and stepping outside you can hear the groans and moans from all the free-roaming and zombified people of the city. Sound design also plays a big role in creating a well-developed atmosphere, and even though I'll talk about the music later, all I'll say for now is that the sound design for this game is just amongst the best, for really only being the second game in the series. Capcom definitely wanted to emphasize a much more bombastic way of storytelling so that the game could sell more copies appealing to a wider variety of people. But even though this tactic can be viewed as corporate and calculating, I have to say that the developers were able to work with everything that they were given, and balance the subtle and dark nature of the first game in combination with more generic action movie stuff. And even a lot of the more louder and less subtle moments end up working for me. The first time you're faced with fighting the William Birkin monster is one of the most memorable and spine-chilling moments I had ever experienced with video games. This game is one in a very few number of games in the series that was able to capture lightning in a bottle when it comes to the management of so many elements that gives this installment such a unique style and identity. Gunshots, environment, background noise, and the overall soundtrack is to me without a doubt the most memorable and best one out of every game from Resident Evil. After this game we don't really get a soundtrack that reaches quite the levels of fantastic as this one until Code Veronica comes along, but it's the quality alongside my personal nostalgia for this game that compels me to put it high on that pedestal. The main theme that the composers wanted to convey was desperation. And all throughout the soundtrack there exists a 3-note motif that gives the music a much more personalized thematic feeling. The very early on games in the series are known to play around with the in and out levels of the music that gives a sense of confusion and disorientation. Very much possible and popular with the digital nature of the soundtrack, and they use it here very effectively. While I wouldn't call this music particularly subtle, much like the first game, it does its job in creating memorable background motifs during your exploration and encounters with enemies. You get plenty of horror. As well as the calm, soothing, and very memorable moments. But apart from successfully adding a cinematic feel to the bigger plot points in the game, the added emotionality to the score gives the game some heartfelt and a more powerful sense of storytelling. When it comes to Resident Evil 2's gaming mechanics, thankfully there isn't a lot to talk about, unlike when it came to the first game. That's because everything here is fairly solid and perfected. Sure, you still have tank controls, but much like the fixed camera angles and limited ammo, stiff game feel is a major part of what makes Resident Evil a good survival horror game. You're supposed to feel helpless and not very agile in the sort of situations you find yourself in because the characters aren't meant to be these great fighters with some kind of special abilities that can get them through any situation. You're supposed to feel like a regular human. What would you do in an event like this? How well would you perform? That's what makes it all the more satisfying and thrilling in the end, because even though the odds are constantly against you, as a regular person who was thrust upon a nightmare world, you come out the other end alive and well. You get a good amount of puzzles here, though still not very challenging like the first game. They have a sort of charm and character that comes with the RE territory. Plenty of homages paid to the original puzzles. There's a chimney that you have to use a lighter on, you got jewels that need to be placed somewhere else, and statues that need to be moved into a context point on the ground as well. The most important change made to this game compared to the original is the opportunity to have double character select and story mode, which the first game did have, but here a full campaign is comprised of 2 different character playthroughs. So let's say you would start off playing as Leon, then finish that campaign, but would have to make a save file and start a scenario B, as it's called in the game, playing as Claire, or vice versa. So that means that in total you have 4 different playable scenarios, each with another playable character that they had to program for. I guess because of this, they really couldn't find the time to program different context-driven story points, which means no multiple endings for one single campaign, like in the original game or many others in the series. The story and the ending stays the same no matter in what order you play through it in each scenario. It's only when you decide with what character to start off with when the events change. Leon and Claire both have their pros and cons. Again, much like the first game, Leon, being the man, has a lighter as his personal item, while Claire's is a lockpick. They both have weapons that are exclusive to each of their playthroughs. Amongst them you can find a shotgun and a magnum for Leon. Claire gets a crossbow and a grenade launcher. Personally, I like to play as Claire over Leon because he feels like he's running through water. With Claire, you just feel lighter and faster. As if all this wasn't enough to program for, the game also has an extreme battle mode, which is kind of like an old beta version of what we know now as the Mercenaries. Then a hunk scenario where you play as the unknown Umbrella soldier that survived and was successful in getting the G-Virus delivered to them. Then another playable scenario where, yes, I'm not joking about this, you get to play as a piece of tofu. Which is just a remasking of the hunk scenario that apparently you unlock by beating the Leon A/Claire B storyline 3 times with an A ranking. Which, I mean, I love RE2, but even I have other shit to do with my time. With all these different elements they had to program for, it's a miracle that the game didn't turn out to be a complete mess. But I guess it just goes to show you that it is possible to make a game as expansive as this and still be focused on quality. Even though this is a much easier experience compared to the first one, it doesn't feel like a baby game. When you die and you haven't saved, you get sent all the way back to the beginning. Ammo is very scarce, especially in the B storyline, unless of course you're playing the easy mode. The first one is harder, sure, but that was mainly because of extremely slow aiming and recovery animations, as well as janky controls and overpowered enemies. The gaming here is very, very balanced and fair played. Sure, there exists the occasional cheap death, but I'd be hard pressed to find at least one game that didn't have that problem, even if it did only happen once. The PlayStation version of Resident Evil 2 has sold over 4.96 million copies around the world. It's the series' best-selling installment and is one of the better received games both by critics and fans alike. The game has received a numerous amount of ports and versions. Right after the original release, the DualShock version was created to support the PlayStation's analog sticks, and contains the Extreme Battle mode along with a Rookie mode that allows you to start the game with an infinite machine gun. There's an infinite ammo cheat code for those who want to breeze through the game, and I think it's the only Resident Evil game to have a classic gaming password. Amongst the numerous amount of ports, I have the GameCube version as well, but personally I prefer to always play the ones on the PS. Just something about the pixelation and the controller brings me a more nostalgia-driven experience than anything else. Resident Evil 2 is one of those rare games that, even though the acting and dialogue can get very video gamey and cheesy, still manages to come out making everything work. The atmosphere, setting, theme, gaming, music, everything is so unmistakable and incredibly iconic, if not the most iconic to the entirety of the series. This is what video games are all about for me right here. A universe presented to us capable of bringing you in through world building and mood setting that is so greatly amplified by the perfected game design and development. You can certainly tell that everyone who worked here gave it their all. Passionate game making at its best. It certainly seems like the 90s was one of those points in history where the technology for entertainment, while limited, was just advanced enough to be able to do some phenomenal things with those limitations. Flashy, over-the-top visuals don't create a story, and they don't create a universe as well. It's the drive to make something out of very little, being smart about your work, treating it with respect and understanding it. All these things is what Resident Evil 2 represents for me, something much more than just a good video game. A journey alongside characters that are memorable, a story with fantastic ideas, and a universe with a tragic and emotional background. My favorite video game ever.